Okay, so I believe you're here on this video because you need some help filling out the forms for spousal sponsorship. Don't worry guys, I'm here to help you on it, where I will take you on a quick ride explaining all the forms in as much detail as possible, but in a much lesser time. Welcome back to my channel, Canadian Desi. Upon searching the internet, I see there were a lot of videos that definitely talked about the same topic, but took way more than enough time to cover it all, specifically over an hour. So as everybody is running short of time in everything these days, I wanted to cover all these forms in as little time as possible by keeping all the obvious and unnecessary information out of the way. So without any further wastage of time, let's get started. The forms or documents that we will talk about in this video are readily available on the CIC website that you can download and start filling up, and make sure you're only filling them up digitally on your laptop or PC via the Adobe Reader and validating them after filling, just to make sure you're not missing any of the important area. Also, please be advised that this video will solely be based on one principal applicant and a sponsor, so if you have more than one applicant or any additional dependents, this video is still applicable for you, but you will need to enter additional info for the other applicants. I will keep mentioning alongside where is such information required for convenience. These are the documents that I'll be discussing in detail, so make sure you're following the whole video until the end. Only skip to the next part if that particular document or form does not relate to your application. Otherwise, I'd highly recommend don't skip, or you will miss out on some of the important things that need to be noted. Alright, so without further ado, let's get started. Okay, the first document that we will start our discussion with is the IMM 5533, or simply call it the document checklist form. That is a summary of all the forms that you will require to submit in your application. You can also use this form as a way of double checking that you're not missing any of the forms. Also, make sure you're submitting this form on top of your application package as a cover page. Okay, now let me first give you a brief explanation on this particular form, and later we will go ahead and talk in detail about each form and how to fill it up specifically. Okay, so the first line basically suggests that if you're somehow not able to provide one or more of the documents required in the checklist, you're supposed to provide a detailed written explanation for each missing documents, or you can even provide any other evidences or documents that could be eligible to satisfy the requirement. Now, this first area is supposed to be completed by the sponsor, so it says that the person I'm sponsoring was declared as my spouse or partner and was already examined as a non-accompanying dependent when I applied for permanent resident visa and did not receive an immigrant visa. So here you have to click on no if your spouse had never applied for a permanent resident visa before, and if they did, you have to obviously click on yes. Later, we move on to the part A, which is the forms required. So the first one is the document checklist for sponsor and principal applicant, which is this document itself. And as I already mentioned before, you have to fill it out and attach it as the covering page of your application package. Now, please note that all these upcoming forms are supposed to be submitted only by the sponsor. So look at this one, which is the application with sponsor, sponsorship agreement and undertaking, which is the IMM 1344, which states that this form is supposed to be signed by both you, which is the sponsor, and the person you're sponsoring, or the principal applicant. The next one is the application fees, which is supposed to be paid by the sponsor. That includes the sponsorship fee, the application fee, and the biometric fee for the principal applicant. Make sure you're attaching the receipts along with the application that shows that you have already made the payment in advance, and over here, check this box if you're paying the right of permanent resident fees in advance as well. So it suggests that paying the RPRF fees at the same time as the processing fees is recommended because, it avoids all the delays that might happen in future when your application reaches the approval stage. So make sure you're paying those fees beforehand. Also, you have an option to pay the biometric fees beforehand as well to avoid any future delays. The next one will be the financial evaluation form, which is the IMM 1283. Please note you're only supposed to fill this form if you have one or more dependent children of your own. If this document doesn't apply to you, you can simply write NA next to the checkbox, and also does not complete this form if you're a resident of Quebec. Alright, so now the next list of documents is required to be filled by the sponsored person or the principal applicant. Okay, so this is the next section. We're supposed to check box for the class of application we're applying under. So if you're currently living in Canada with your sponsor, then you're applying under the spouse or common law partner in Canada class. If that's the case, you are supposed to mail your application to this address. Otherwise, if you're currently living outside Canada and applying under the family class, then you're supposed to mail your application to this address in Sydney, Nova Scotia. On the other hand, if you're currently living in Canada and applying under the family class, then you're also supposed to mail your application to Sydney, Nova Scotia, but to a different address, which is this one. Now, moving on to the next document, which is the generic application form for Canada, that is the IMM 0008. This is where you, as the principal applicant, are supposed to fill up this form for yourself and your dependents, and the state that there is enough space for you to include your 5 dependents. In the next section, you're supposed to submit documents specifically related to your home country. So any other additional form for for example your travel history or anything that has not already been included in your application, need to be declared here. So here you can mention what kind of document it is in these sections. Now the next form that the principal applicant needs to fill out is regarding the additional family information, which is the IMM 5406. So here you are supposed to mention any of your family members who are 18 years of age or older and who are not already the Canadian citizens or permanent residents. Next, this document is to be filled out with the applicant, which is the background declaration form, also called the IMM 5669. So this form, just like the IMM 5406 we just talked about, you as the principal applicant is supposed to fill out along with any of your family members who are 18 years of age or older. Now the upcoming documents are to be filled out by both the sponsor and the principal applicant. The first one will be the relationship information and sponsorship evaluation form, also called the IMM 5532. So as it states, the sponsor must sign Part A number 9 and Part C number 12. For the principal applicant, they must sign Part B number 5 and Part C number 13. Now the next form to be filled out by either the sponsor or the principal applicant is the use of representative form, or the IMM 5476. Only if you want to name a representative such as an immigration lawyer, consultant, a friend, or even a family member to represent you. So it states that when you appoint such a representative, you also provide an authorization to the IRCC and the Canadian Border Services that the information about your case file will only be received by the representative you mentioned. So here you're supposed to select either of these two options. If you're not appointing a representative, checkbox the first one. If you're appointing a representative, checkbox the second option and also fill up the IMM 5476 form along with it. Also, please make a note of this important section here that states that if a sponsor will receive correspondence for or act in any way on behalf of the principal applicant or any dependent child over the age of 18, including the application for permanent residence, the applicant must each complete their own use of representative form listing the sponsor as a representative. If this is not provided, the application could be returned without being processed. So basically, if the principal applicant would like the sponsor to receive all the updates regarding their application, then they are supposed to fill this IMM 5476 and list the sponsor as their authorized representative. Now the next one is a form that can be used by you as an authorization to release your personal information to a designated individual who actually will not act as a representative. This document, I believe, is a rare case and very seldom filled up by everyone. If you have somebody you want to supply your information to on your behalf, you're very welcome to fill out this form as well. Now the next part is the Part B, which covers all the supporting documents that the sponsor and the principal applicant require to submit. It states that any document which is not already in English or French are to be translated in either English or French and certified. You can also check the country specific requirements on this given website to know about any such specific document. So this area is supposed to be filled out by the sponsor. If you're a permanent resident, check this box. If you're a Canadian citizen, check this box along with any of these sub boxes. And if you have an Indian status in Canada, you can check this third box. The next section asks you if you're the sponsor and a Canadian citizen living outside Canada. So you check yes or no, whatever is applicable. The next section asks the sponsor if you or the person you're sponsoring have any children together. So you just check yes or no based on what applies to your status. After that, the next section asks if the sponsor had any previous relationships. That is, if you're already married to anyone other than the person you're sponsoring. If you answered yes, but if you're legally separated, provide a proof of separation as well. Next, you're supposed to mention if you as a sponsor has been previously sponsored by someone else for a permanent residence. If your answer is yes, then you're supposed to be providing the full name and the date of birth of who the sponsor was in these two sections. The third section asks you if you have ever been previously married, so fill up this section as per what your status suggests. Later on, the sponsor is supposed to provide an explanation about the employment or the source of their income. You don't have to fill this out if you're a Quebec resident, but if you're working in Canada, you're supposed to submit an original letter from your current employer stating a period of employment, salary, and any other supporting financial documents if you're self-employed, along with one of the documents issued by the Canadian Revenue Agency, that is either your most recent notice of assessment or the proof of income statement. However, if you're not working in Canada, you're supposed to provide any other documentation or proof that shows that you can still support the person you're sponsoring financially. Now let's talk about the supporting documents that are to be submitted by the sponsored persons, or you can say the principal applicant. The first is the identity document, travel documents, and passports. You can go through this detailed explanation to find out what exactly you need to submit. The next is the civil status document that signifies your current relationship, for example your marriage certificate and any other proof that your marriage is legally registered with the government. Also make sure to submit any other supporting documents related to your previous marriage or relationship. The next section asks you as the principal applicant the additional information about your children, either it's minor or 22 years or older. If your child is adopted, you need to submit the adoption papers and all other evidences as well. Next, the principal applicant needs to have a police certificate that should be under their name for all the countries that they currently live in or have lived in for 6 months or more. On the other hand, if you have lived in Canada for the last 6 months or Canada is the country where you have lived for most of your life since the age of 18, then the police certificates for Canada are not required at this time. IRCC will themselves request this info on your behalf if they need to. Next, you're supposed to supply 2 recent photos of each of yourself or your family members and make sure the photographs meet the photo specifications that is stated here in this link, which may otherwise result in a processing delay. The next thing that they ask you is a medical examination that is not required to be completed at this time. So once your application reaches a certain stage, the IRCC themselves ask you to go through a medical examination. So you can leave this section for now. Now the next thing that the applicant needs to submit is a proof of their relationship to the sponsor that includes all the evidence like the photos, joint bank accounts, chat history, call history, and all such info. Later they ask you if you and your spouse are currently living together. Go through this whole section and check box that suits your status. If you guys are not living together, then you're supposed to provide them a proof of contact like letters, text messages, social media conversations, and all such stuff, what we just talked about. Now here they ask you for a certified translation in English or French, but I honestly did not get any such translations while submitting my wife's application, even though we both used to talk in a different language. So it's basically your choice. If you'd like to sleep better at night, no problem, go ahead and get it done. You are recommended to pick at least 2 of the following sets of documents, but you can submit as many evidences as you like. Next, they ask if you and yourselves have any children together. Next, if this is a first marriage for both you and your sponsor. Next, they ask if you and your sponsor has been married for a minimum of 2 years since the date of this application. So check the box that applies to your status. Now, please note that if you have answered no to any of the previously asked questions, then you're required to submit photos of your wedding and all the celebrations that happened during your marriage. They ask to provide a maximum of 20 photographs, but if you have hundreds of photographs and you can't decide which ones to submit, you can submit more than 20 photos to provide a better explanation of your relationship. Once all this is done, this last page gives you a quick blueprint of all the forms that you're supposed to submit. So make sure you have all of them completely filled up, validated, and signed. Okay, now let's do an in-depth but relatively quick go through of all these forms we just talked about. The first one that we will cover is the IMM 1344 document, which is also known as the application to sponsor, sponsorship agreement, and undertaking. Now, as you can see, these boxes that are marked red, this is basically an indication that these boxes are the first ones that need to be filled up before moving on to any other box which is not red. If any of these sections gets missed, a proper validation will not occur, and hence a code will not generate that is needed to go ahead with your application. The first option says if you're found ineligible to sponsor, indicate whether you would like to withdraw your sponsorship application or proceed with the application. Now what it means here is that there are certain criteria in the processing of such applications where you are deemed appropriate to sponsor your spouse or don't. So in case you're not approved for sponsorship, would you still like your spouse's application to process? I'd recommend you to proceed, and I believe this is what you should do in your right mind. Next, choose the language you like to correspond in. Next, they ask you if there's a co-signer on this application. I see a lot of people getting confused at this stage. You're supposed to answer no. It is because this form is not limited only to sponsoring your partner. The same form is used to sponsor other family members such as parents or grandparents, in which case your partner could co-sign. Of course, it wouldn't make sense to have a partner co-sign to sponsor themselves, so please keep in mind you are your spouse's sponsor, not a co-signer. So answer no. Next, you fill up the name of the person you're sponsoring along with their date of birth. Here you can fill out the given name as well as which is your first name, even though it's not marked red. Next, you choose the relationship of the principal applicant to you. So here you will go down and choose spouse living outside Canada. If your case is different, choose your specific one. Later, you go down and fill the sponsor's name. If you're the sponsor, enter your full name. If you've used any other nickname, maiden name officially, check yes and state that as well. After that, enter your gender, date of birth, and place of birth in the required fields. Then, what status do you currently have in Canada at the time of applying for this application? After that, your current marital status. The most common one will be married, so I'll choose that. Then you need to answer if you've been previously married or in any other common law relationship. Now we move on to the next page. Here, the sponsor fills out his contact information, that is complete address with city and country. Please note this could either be a Canadian address or a foreign address depending on where would you like to receive all the correspondences related to your application. If you have hired an immigration lawyer or any other representative, then they will need to enter this information. After that, choose if your residential address is the same as the mailing address chosen above. Now you go down to the section where it asks, are you a Canadian citizen living exclusively outside Canada? If you're a permanent resident, choose no and move on to the next part. If you choose yes, then you need to indicate where you intend to live after your spouse becomes a PR. Now a few inches down comes the sponsor eligibility assessment. So if you plan to reside in Quebec, or if you're already residing in Quebec, then you need to answer questions 8, 9, 10 or 15, which you see are not marked red. And please note that if you answered no to any of the first 4 questions except the 4th question, which can only be answered no by a Canadian citizen, you will automatically be deemed ineligible for sponsoring your partner. All are basic questions and can be filled easily. Let me know in the comments if you face any problem answering any question. Now once all the information has been entered, you scroll down and see this section, which is the undertaking done by the sponsor or the co-signer. Basically what they say here is that you're responsible for taking care of the persons being sponsored financially and fulfill all their requirements. And once they land in Canada and become a PR, it will solely be based on their relationship to you as a sponsor and all such stuff. And also that they will not need to apply for any social assistance and that you will be there for them at all times. Also, it is mentioned that this undertaking will not be changed no matter what changes in your life. For example, if you change job, become unemployed, or even become divorced, this undertaking will remain in effect for a certain period of time until the end of its cycle. You should give this whole section a read to fully understand what's included in the undertaking. So once all this information is read and understood, you can click on validate. Upon validation, a barcode shows up which indicates that the form has been fully completed. Further, you move on to the sponsorship agreement, which basically mentions the same stuff that we just talked about. In order to keep this video as short as possible, I will skip these parts. You're welcome to read it for yourself and fully understand the conditions, obligations, and agreements that happen between the sponsor and their partner or the principal applicant. Once everything is read and understood, you can go ahead. Both the sponsor and their spouse can put down their signatures in their respective slots along with the date of the application. Please note, since this video is about a spouse sponsorship, the second slot is not to be signed or dated. Alright guys, so before moving on to the next form, if you're getting enough knowledge out of this video, then make sure you're hitting that like button down there. This will help this video beat the YouTube algorithm and come on top of searches and help other potential viewers as well. And if you don't want to miss out on any of my upcoming videos related to spousal sponsorship, then make sure to hit that red subscribe button and click the bell icon as well. I have a lot more videos coming up in future specifically related to spousal sponsorship, so make sure you don't miss checking them out. Alright, now let's move on to the next form, which is the relationship information and sponsorship evaluation, also called the INN 5532 form. Please note, for this form there are no red highlighted boxes, so you're required to fill out all the empty spaces whichever suits your scenario. Also, just like the previous form we just talked about, there will be no validation button. Okay, so under the personal information about sponsor, enter your full name along with the date of birth and client ID if you have any. Next, you type in the same information about the sponsored person along with their date of birth and client ID if they have any. Now we will work on part A, which is only to be filled out by the sponsor. The first subpart asks about the sponsor's employment history, and as stated here, you have to make sure that you're showing all your employment data starting with your current employer over the past 5 years, and please make sure there are no gaps in between the time period. So I will start filling up all the information with some made up companies so that you guys can have a better idea. Make sure under monthly gross income you're entering your salary that you received before tax deduction. Under the second subpart, which is the other sponsorships, you have to let the officials know if you have ever sponsored anyone in the past, or if you're currently sponsoring any other members of your family in a different application. If there's no one you're sponsoring, click no and move on to the next question. And if you answer yes, list all such members in the columns below with their family name and given name along with their date of birth, even if they're not PR yet and their application is currently in process. Now we go to the next subpart, which is the other financially dependent people. So as the details clearly suggest that you have to provide details of any of your family members, whether they're living with you in Canada or not. And if they're not already listed in the tables above, then make sure you're mentioning them. So for example, you have a child who's already a Canadian citizen or a teenager who is 18 years old but still financially dependent on you, then make sure you're entering their names and date of birth in these columns. Now the next subpart is the level of education. Here the sponsor needs to checkbox the highest level of education that they have completed along with the number of years. Next, under the address history, the sponsor needs to enter all the addresses that they have lived in the past 5 years. I will fill them up with some made up addresses just so you all have an idea about it. Now under the subpart residence in Canada, the sponsor have to mention if they're currently living in Canada. If they are, check yes and move on. If the answer is no, then fill up these 3 further questions only in a date format in the first 2 questions and the name of the city and province in the 3rd question. Okay, now under the previous relationship subpart, you have to answer if you have ever been married or in a common law relationship with another person. If your answer is no, you can simply move on to the next question. If you answered yes, you also need to mention your previous spouse's date of birth and the time period of relationship you had along with the date you got divorced or separated. Now the next subpart is a simple request to the sponsor to disclose any information to their spouse or partner in case there is an investigation done and a marriage fraud case is found out about the sponsor. So just simply click yes and move on to the next part. Now under the ninth subpart, the sponsor has to put down their signatures along with today's date. Now the part B is only for the principal applicant, where the sponsor person is required to fill out all the info. Under the first subpart, you need to answer if your sponsor was related to you in any way before the start of your relationship. Basically, if there's anyone, either a member of your family or the sponsor's family, who were the reason behind the start of your relationship, then you need to mention their name, date of birth, as well as their relationship to you and the sponsor. Under the second subpart, the principal applicant needs to mention if they have any relatives already living in Canada. If no, just simply put an A in the first column. If yes, mention their names, addresses, and relationship to you. But please note, if you already have family members that you plan on listing on the IMM form 5406, then you don't need to mention that same info in this page. Just put NA and move ahead. Under the third subpart, the sponsored person needs to mention if they have ever been married before with another person. If yes, fill out their name with the date of birth along with the time of relationship and the date of separation. Under this fourth subpart, just what we discussed about in the sponsor section, click yes if you want your sponsor to know in case there is an investigation done and a marriage fraud case is found about you. Under the fifth subpart, the principal applicant puts down their signature along with today's date. Now comes the part C, where both the sponsor and the principal applicant need to provide information about the relationship. Under the first subpart, mention the date you both first met in person, either it was in Canada or abroad. Put the date you first met and the location. For the location, you can either put the city with the country or be more specific about the location. Next, describe the circumstances of your first meeting. What they mean by this is you have to define the occasion or a certain kind of scenario that happened which led to your first meeting. It could either be someone's marriage where you both saw each other, or some sort of a dating app where you right swiped each other and similar stuff. Next, if there was someone who assisted you both in your first meeting, either it's a common family friend or anybody you both know, so you need to mention their name as well. Under the third subpart, specify if you both are currently living together. If it is an outland application, then definitely your answer will be no. Here you will have to mention that currently you are in Canada while your spouse is back home. Also mention the history where you actually lived together and for how long. If it is an inland application, then probably you will answer yes. Therefore, mention the details about how long have you been living together since the start of your relationship and all the mandatory info. Under the fourth subpart, which will mostly be for the outlanders, mention if you have ever visited each other during your relationship. For example, the sponsor taking flights to meet their spouse back home whenever they got a chance, as well as how often and all that stuff. If no, explain the reason why not. If yes, mention the time periods along with who visited whom. Did you stay together at the same location, yes or no, and the place where you stayed. Under the fifth subpart, mention the languages you both use to communicate with each other. It doesn't only have to be in English or French. Be honest and without hesitation mention the actual languages you both interact in. Under the sixth subpart, mention how often do you guys talk to each other, either it's a simple phone call or a video call. Specify the length of time that you spend talking to each other. Under the seventh subpart, specify if your close friends, family, and children know about your relationship. If yes, provide the details with their full name and if they're related to the sponsor or the applicant, and their relationship to the sponsor or the applicant, as well as when was the first time they met the opposite person, that is the sponsor or the principal applicant. For example, if the sponsor has a close family friend, you have to mention when did they meet the applicant for the first time. If your answer is no, mention the details why not. The eighth subpart, it is only for people who are married. If you're under a conjugal relationship or a common law, that you can move on to the next question. If married, specify if your marriage was arranged or of any other type. If it was arranged, specify who arranged it, when did it happen, and what was the location where it happened. Under the ninth subpart, specify if there were any formal ceremonies or celebrations to recognize your relationship. So you have all kinds of ceremonies and traditional celebrations mentioned here, so you can specify which ones happened in yours. If there was no celebration that occurred, explain the reason why in this box below. If yes, mention the date, the description of ceremony or event, the location, the number of guests, as well as who managed or performed everything in that ceremony. Under that, you can see all the straightforward questions if the parents, children, and any other family members of both the sponsor and the principal applicant were present in these ceremonies. So tick marking yes to all these questions is a very good sign for a successful approval of your application. So be very truthful here, because everything will be clear in the photos that you will provide. However, if any of them were not a part of your celebration, then mention the reason why not. Under the 10th subpart, specify if either of you are pregnant. If yes, mention the due date. Under the 11th subpart, you are asked to mention any other info that you wish to provide to the processing officer, and what do you think would be really important for the officials to know. For example, this is where you can free format your love story, how you met, how your relationship developed, why you are now living as you are, etc. If insufficient space, put a note saying refer attached appendix and create a separate sheet with your details on it, sign and date it, etc. Once everything is done and after double checking that everything looked good, both sponsor and applicant will sign these slots and put the date you're applying. The 14th subpart needs to be filled up by only if an interpreter assisted any of you guys in filling up this form by converting all the info written in this form in your understandable language. Here they have to put down their name and specify the language in which they have interpreted with the sponsor or the applicant. After that, the interpreter put down their signatures and date, and that's it. We can now move on to the next form. Alright, now let's talk about the IMM 0008 form, which is where the applicant will put down the generic or basic contact info as well as what program they're applying under. Now, as you can see, they do have a validate button right here, so you will get an option to validate it at the end after the form completion. But before that, go right here and click on highlight existing fields. If the boxes are not already red marked, please note these boxes are mandatory to be filled. You can also fill other boxes that are not marked. Under the first question, specify the program you're applying under. So for spousal sponsorship, it will be family class. Under the second, choose either spouse, common law, or conjugal, whichever applies to your case. Under the third, specify how many members are applying under this category. So if it's just the spouse, enter 1. But if you have any dependent children, include them in the total as well. Under the fourth question, specify the language you would like to converse in for the future correspondences, interviews, and if you would like to request an interpreter or not. Under fifth, specify the province or territory and the city town where you will be living in after your visa. This would most probably be the place where the sponsor currently resides, so fill up the same province and the city. Under personal details, mention your full name, any nickname if you have, your gender, height in centimeters, eye color, date of birth, place of birth with city and country, country of citizenship or citizenships if more than one, current country of residence as well as the status in that country. Also specify if you lived in any other country other than your original country of citizenship. Under the 13th tab, specify your current marital status and the date of your marriage, then provide the name of your current spouse, which will most probably will be the sponsor of your application. Under the 14th, mention if you have ever been previously married or not. If yes, mention their info. Now under contact information, this is the address where all the correspondences related to your application will go. If you have already hired a lawyer as a representative to take care of your case, then their address will go on these slots. If you wish to receive all the information about your application yourself, either it's the principal applicant or the sponsor, then you can enter your address here. Next, if the residential address is the same as mailing address, then click yes. Otherwise, mention the address separately where you actually reside. Now under passports tab, mention your passport's info like the number, the country, the issue date, expiry date, etc. For the 5th and 6th, answer the questions accordingly, whatever matches your scenario. Now under the national identity document, you have to provide any other form of ID other than your passport. For Indian applicants, it could either be their Aadhaar card, driving license, etc. along with all the related info. Next, under the education and occupation section, the applicant needs to mention the highest level of education that they have acquired. You can see all these options here along with the number of years. Under current occupation, mention your current job title. If you're not working at the moment, type unemployed. And in the fourth section, mention what occupation do you plan to do once you arrive in Canada. It must be a tricky question for a lot of you guys since not everybody is not sure what they will end up doing once they are in Canada. So since this form is also called a generic form for a reason, your answer could also be generic. So if you're not sure about it, simply write unknown. Now under the language tab, mention your native tongue or the language in which you can interact most easily. Here you have hundreds of languages to choose from. Next, specify if you can communicate in English or French. Next, you need to specify if you have ever taken a language proficiency test in either English or French, though it's not a mandatory thing, but if you did, then you can specify. Alright, now comes the dependents tab where you need to mention any members in your family who are financially dependent on you, either they are going to accompany you to Canada or not, and even if they are not already the permanent residents or the citizens of Canada. So all their basic info like their name, gender, date of birth, place of birth, and all such info will go in these tabs. If you don't have any dependent, then you must have entered one right here all the way up, which automatically means no dependent. In that case, just click on this blue button that says remove dependent, and that's it. Now you're good to validate. Right after that, click yes right here, and then right here, and then right here. Your name cannot be typed, so you will be manually putting your name down here after this paperwork is printed. Then right here, click on yes again. Then in the box, the applicant will put down their signatures along with the date. Once this is all done, click on validate again, and if everything was entered correctly, a barcode will appear. Make sure you're printing and submitting this page along with the rest of our application. Now we're good to move on to the next form. Okay, now this is the form IMM 0008DP, which is only to be filled if and only if you have more than 5 dependents, whether they are accompanying you or not. This form, just like the previous forms, only requires basic and some detailed info about those dependents. If you don't have any dependents at all, you can leave this form and move on to the next one. Alright, now comes the IMM 5406 form, which is where the applicant and all their dependent children 18 years of age or older will need to provide their additional family information. Make sure all the names are in English as well as in your native language. Previously, I don't think we had this requirement where we had to enter names in native languages as well, but if they clearly stated here, then you should do it. Also, please note the characters had to be typed or printed in black. Okay, now under section A, the relationships are already mentioned here, so fill them up accordingly. Now under the first tab, the applicant will enter their name, marital status, date of birth, country, present address either in Canada or outside, and lastly their email address. Please note every member who will be a part of this application, even their dependent children, will need to fill out their own copy of this form. So currently we're filling this form from the applicant's point of view. Now under section B, the applicant will mention their children if they have any with all the related info. If this section does not apply to you, write NA, which is not applicable in each tab, and move on to the next section. Now under section C, mention all your siblings, even if they are step siblings with the same info as we entered before. Now put your signatures down under section D along with the date, and here we are done with this form. Okay, now let's move on to the next form, which is the background declaration form, also called the IMM 5669. This, just like the previous forms, will also need to be filled up by the principal applicant along with any of their dependent children who will be a part of the PR application, and each have to submit their own copy of this form. Alright, let's get started with the personal details, the applicant's full name, date of birth. Next, the basic personal info of the applicant's parents. Next, this fourth section is basically asking the applicant to specify their criminal declaration, that if they have ever been convicted of a crime in Canada or outside Canada, if they have ever made any previous refugee claims, and if they have ever been refused any type of visa to Canada and any other country, and all such info. So if any of these 11 options apply to you, click yes and mention the details in the space provided below. Now under the fifth section, provide your education history by adding the number of years to your most recent education qualification, along with the starting and ending time, the type and level of study that you did or are currently doing, name of your institution along with city and country. If you like to specify more than one education, do the same on the next sections. If not, then remove them. Now comes one of the most important part, where you need to mention your personal history as well as what you did for the last 10 years or since the day you turned 18, whichever is most recent. I call it important because I believe the officials focus a lot on this aspect of you and majorly would like to know everything about your past before going ahead with your application. So make sure you're not missing any gaps in between time periods. So start with the most recent one. I'll fill it up with some made up information. So starting with the year 2019 till now, which is ongoing, the applicant is employed working under this position, their status in that country, the name of the company, where they are working, city, country, and done. Now in the next section, without leaving any time gap in between, we start with the month before the last one under the same year. Here, for example, let's say you were unemployed or homemaker or studying for a certain period of time along with all the related info. So this is how you keep going until you have a record for the last 10 years or since the age you turned 18. I will fill this whole information up just to give you guys an idea. If you need more rows, click here to add more rows. Here you mention if you have been a member of an organization or association. So tick mark what suits you and mention the details if you have any. Under the 8, specify if you have ever held any government position either inside or outside Canada and mention those details as well. When you click no, the rows will automatically disappear. Under 9th, mention if you have ever served in the military or armed forces of any country in the world and specify the details. Okay, now another one of the important sections, that is your address history. Here you need to mention all the addresses that you've lived in since your 18th birthday or for the past 10 years, whichever is most recent. So start with the latest address and make sure that just like the personal history we just worked on, you're not missing any time gaps. I will do this for you guys as well with some made up addresses so you guys can get an idea. Slow it down if you like to have a better view. Now we are at the end of this form. This is where the principal applicant needs to agree that their disclosed information shall be used by the government authorities and other officials to evaluate your information. If you agree, type your full name in the section along with the date and then click on validate. If everything is correct, the barcodes will appear that you need to print and submit with your application. Okay, now comes the IMM 5562 form where the principal applicant needs to provide their travel information. Basically, it means that you have to provide all the trips that you made outside your home country within the last 10 years or since the day you turn 18. If you or none of your family members or dependent children travel outside the country, then checkbox did not travel. Otherwise, mention the time period by typing the year and month as well as the length of time you were in that country, the destination name along with the purpose. So let's say, for example, the principal applicant and the sponsor traveled from India to Spain right after their marriage in February for a period of 5 days to celebrate their honeymoon. Then this is how they will record their information here. The same info has to be filled in for the applicant's spouse, which is most probably the sponsor. If the sponsor traveled to another country without their spouse, they will need to mention that info here. For the dependent children, I will click did not travel, and that's it. This document is complete. Alright, now comes the last form that need to be filled up only by people who have either appointed an immigration lawyer to apply on their behalf, or they would like to cancel the representative that they appointed before. This is basically a form that authorizes the representative that you choose for your application. Either it's one of your unpaid family members or friends or cousins, or the paid ones like the immigration lawyers. So you can send them through this form to receive all the information related to your application. Please note, appointing a representative is not at all mandatory. If you yourself have the knowledge to go ahead with your application, you are permitted to do so. Okay, so as mentioned here, if this is about appointing a representative, complete section A, B, and D. Or else, if you'd like to cancel the representative you appointed before, complete sections A, C, and D. Since the applicants who have already appointed a lawyer will themselves fill this form on your behalf, hence for this video we will only focus on canceling an appointed representative. And please note, this cancellation form is mostly submitted at a later stage after you've already mailed out your application. So under section A, fill up your personal details along with the name of the office, which is either Nova Scotia or Mississauga office, and the type of application, which is spousal sponsorship, family class, and client ID. Now keep scrolling down, and under section C, mention your representative's full name as well as their company's name if they have any. And under section D, signature of both the applicant and their spouse along with the date, and that's it. This form can now be submitted to the government to cancel the representative that you appointed before during the submission of your application. Alright guys, so that was all for this video. It was a bit long, but I hope I covered all the basic, especially the mandatory info related to these forms. If you have any more questions regarding any of these forms, then please get back to me in the comment section. I answer all my comments, and if you like this video, please make sure you're hitting that like button. This will help this video beat the YouTube algorithm and come on top of searches. And if you don't want to miss out on any of my upcoming videos related to spousal sponsorship, then make sure to hit that red subscribe button and click the bell icon. I have a lot more videos coming up in future specifically related to spousal sponsorship. So until next time, see you again on Canadian Desi.